Good afternoon, thank you for all turning up. Okay, it's 2:30 in the morning and the call suddenly comes in. An almost incoherent crying dog owner is calling up because Rover, her Great Dane and her pride and joy, has started to vomit non-productively and is looking like it's starting to bloat. This is the dreaded GDV, which it's a horrible condition, and it occurs when the stomach inflates and twists, and it's a true emergency and is almost certainly going to require surgery. So you instruct the owner to come on down to the clinic immediately, and you begin prepping the team. Well, your nurse and your one receptionist if you're lucky, but I digress. Now, time is of the absolute essence in such situations, and it's therefore imperative that you know and feel confident knowing exactly what to do. But these rarely happen, and well, how on earth can you actually train for it? So stress levels rise as you cast your mind back into the recesses of your brain and think about the last surgery that you did. And you run downstairs, grab the last copy of Slatters or other such weighty vet school tome to brush up on, just the specifics. Now, contrast this scene to the one in which you have practiced, not just once, but hundreds of times, often back to back for a few hours at a time. And all without the requirement for an operating theatre or a scalpel. Now, this is what a future with virtual reality in veterinary medicine and medical training promises, and it's one that I'm personally very, very excited by. So, needless to say, I'm a vet, small animal to be precise, although that does generally include everything smaller than a Great Dane. I'm also a massive tech nerd and with a particular interest in VR and mixed reality, which I'm actually convinced are set to fundamentally change medical education and the industry, both human and veterinary. Now, my goal here today is to do two things. One is to initially look at the current use cases of VR in the veterinary sector, and then to do a bit of stargazing, which is the fun bit, to think about where we might go in the future. One thing you do get used to pretty quickly being a vet is that a lot of the advances in our field start their life in the human medical sector, and it makes perfect sense. I mean, why would a lot of them not start in the medical sector? So some of the existing use cases are going to be from the medical sort of sector. But it doesn't take a huge leap of imagination to think about the applications to veterinary. So in my opinion, the primary use for VR, both current and future, and its power is really as an educational tool. It's really going to be the focus here today, and starting at vet school and then moving post-vet school into how it can be used to keep vet skills sharp. Now, veterinary training takes a long time. In the US, it's typically a 4-year postgrad course, whereas in the UK, it can take anything between 5 and 6 years to get a Bachelor of Science. Now, during that time, we need to learn the intricate workings of not only one species, but several. Then we need to learn about the myriad ways in which things can go wrong, and go wrong they do. And then we're expected to know how to intervene and treat such ailments. Then we're also expected to morph from fresh-faced, naive undergraduates into sort of professionals, and to also possess a bedside manner and be able to deal with the various non-medical aspects of cases. Essentially how to deal with clients, which is the hardest part of the job by a long way. So any tools that can make this process smoother, more efficient, and long-lasting have a place, and I believe that virtual reality is such a tool. Now, anatomy and physiology teaching are the two areas that make for obvious candidates for VR, as being able to explore the bodies of different species in intricate and realistic detail, including seeing how various systems work, such as the heart, really helps to reinforce fundamental principles in the minds of tomorrow's surgeons and medics. One example is the Stanford Children's Hospital, the project being led by Dr. David Axelrod, where they're creating these immersive heart environments to demonstrate to students, patients and families what can go wrong in various heart conditions. And they're finding that this really isn't reinforcing fundamental learning principles and understanding, and ultimately sort of patient satisfaction, because they really understand exactly what it is their doctor's doing to intervene to help. Now, thinking back, I remember our weekly dissection classes at vet school, and how we'd spend the entire morning clad in gumboots and waterproofs as we work in our small groups dissecting whatever preserved dog we'd been sort of assigned that morning. Now, whilst dissection is certainly a step up in terms of learning from pure reading and which is bookwork, it's not really a particularly good model for the for the real world situation, and has a number of limitations. So it's not really one of the things that's wrong with it is formalin. When you're preserving a body, changes the tissue. So you're not really getting that experience of handling real life tissue as you would in surgery. So that's one limitation. Secondly, it's a one-use model, because once you've made the cut, that's it, you've made the cut. There's no reset. Now, the best way to learn most things, in my experiences anyway, is to repeat them again and again and again until it sinks in. Now, this isn't possible with traditional dissection. Then there's the expense and scarcity issue. So it's not easy or indeed palatable to be able to source all of these bodies for students. And the problem is just as big for human medics. I'd say it's probably bigger. So it's only going to get worse as class sizes enlarge, safety regulations become stricter, and each student gets less and less time actually hands-on. Now, what could be an alternative, I hear you ask? Well, virtual reality and eventually mixed reality, I think, will come to the rescue. So there's no longer will there be a need to stand for hours in a stinky dissection hall, becoming hungry, because formalin, interestingly, is a potent appetite stimulant. So vet students of the future will find themselves in a VR lab, or maybe even at home, working through cases and classes with either on their own or with their classmates. Now, if you combine that with things like haptics, which are getting better and better all the time, like the VR glove, then if you could accurately mimic the feel of real tissue, then there'll be no need to be the group that jostles to get the sinuous greyhound, which is incidentally the perfect teaching dog, by the way, or be the member of the group who makes the first cut. Because VR will provide us with whatever specimens we need and the ability to practice the same thing over and over again, and all at the expense of some electrons and processing power. Now, teaching the anatomy of even more complex and hard to source species like some of the truly exotic animals, or even just bringing in difficult to source animals such as the farm species, VR and mixed reality could make that problem go away. And I believe there won't be a body system or physiology or any kind of teaching environment that won't be sort of improved by VR. And it'll be accessible all by the touch of a button or a virtual menu, I guess would be. Now, an example of a company doing something to realize this vision is Llama Zoo, a Canadian startup with their Easy Anatomy app. This provides students with a layered 3D simulation of a dog, which they can zoom in and out of, rotate and move, and explore various body systems. Now, they've recently launched their, I think I need to nod to someone to get this to start. Yeah. Recently launched their virtual reality, so fully immersive experience, and also a mixed reality experience with the HoloLens, which I actually tried just before this talk, and it's really compelling. So a very powerful teaching tool. Now, it's not just the obvious subjects that will benefit from the VR touch. Just as vital are subjects like pharmacology, which can seem really super dull when taught from a book, traditional lecture-based model. But imagine being able to take a virtual tour and actually take the same journey as that studied drug and see its effects on the body from a VR perspective. Personally, I think that would result in a really, really long-lasting learning outcome. Now, I would honestly go back to vet school for another 5 years if we had some of the tools that are coming, because I think it's just going to make the experience so much more compelling and interesting. Now, one of my favorite examples of veterinary VR, using the sort of broader sort of definition of the term, is the Haptic Cow. Now, this was developed by Professor Sarah Bailey, and it simulates the sensation of performing this is a very vetty theme, a rectal examination of a cow in order to check for signs of pregnancy or to indicate the stage of the reproductive cycle. Now, with very real economic implications of this for farmers, being able to do this well and skillfully is really important. Now, the Haptic Cow uses force feedback to simulate such examinations, and there's the ability to toggle between different states to model various different conditions and states of pregnancy, so you can get a really, really curated learning experience. Now, in spite of having spent many a cold morning having the feeling literally squeezed out of my gloved arm and being covered by prodigious amounts of shite. I never really got the hang of this, so I'm not a farm animal vet. But I wonder whether if I'd had access to the Haptic Cow when I was at vet school, I went back and tried it, I might have been a much better vet at this and probably would have saved, well, the welfare of cows would have been vastly improved as well, which is a good aim. Now, once we graduate, we are qualified to practice both medicine and surgery, although the learning certainly doesn't stop there. And like medics, vets are expected to continue their professional education to prove they have done so through CPD, continued professional development. Now, that includes the option to go on and study a plethora of subjects and become a specialist in something like small animal surgery, for example. Now, practical CPD is currently delivered predominantly through attendance at group workshops, which can be anything from a full-day course of lectures and practical sessions to a multi-day course if you're learning something particularly sort of complex, like, say, surgery. Now, the costs of attending such courses do vary, but generally in the $1,000 mark at the entry level, which often means the entire CPD budget for the year. And I find they're often oversold, with the result being that the practical elements often end up getting shared between delegates. Now, I went to an ultrasound course recently in London, so I flew from Dubai, where I'm based, to London for a 2-day course. And while the content was perfectly fine and I did learn something useful, we ended up sharing the learning resource, so I ended up effectively getting a third of the practical time that I really wanted, and that limited my learning, the learning sort of outcome, in my opinion. Now, I can remember thinking to myself, now this could all be delivered via VR. So VR could essentially eliminate the cost while delivering a customizable training experience. And especially if the haptic capabilities were top-notch, then it could realistically simulate a whole host of practical scenarios and patients. So no long flight, no hotel expenses, no time away from work, or excessive time away from work, and ultimately the learning outcome that I wanted. Now, even relatively simple-based tablet systems, and this is my vision of the future. Okay. Whilst my image of the vet student of the future is probably several years off, and VR is still just starting to gain some semblance of familiarity with the wider public, I am convinced that the compelling advantages of VR in medical training, especially with practical skills that demand repetition to develop, will drive us ultimately to a world in which our vets and doctors consider VR to be an essential tool in their educational journey. it's going to ultimately be for the benefit of us as patients and owners, and who knows, maybe even our patients might find some use for it as well. That was Kira, a very willing participant. Thank you very much for listening.